So the next thing that I'm going to talk about for the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock is I'm going to talk about the characteristics of modernism that can be found in this poem. So modernism is basically going against the grain. It's doing things with your poetry or your writing that is not extremely with the grain of how everyone else does things. So for modernism, a lot of the characteristics are disillusionment, which is having a lot of things kind of hard to understand, but as a whole, the poem can be understood at the very end. And so this disillusionment kind of goes in with the whole modernism thing. And so I'm going to talk about some things in this poem that use disillusionment. So as I've already read, it talks about in the very beginning of the poem, it says, "To lead you to an overwhelming question, oh, do not ask, what is it? Let us go and make our visit." So it's saying a question. There's a question, and he's saying, do not ask what it is. So this is automatically, from the very start, the very stanza that this poem begins with, is using disillusionment. We don't know what this question is, but we're assuming that throughout the rest of the poem we'll be able to understand what he is talking about. And that is disillusionment. Having something that doesn't make sense when you read it at first, but as you read the rest of the story or the poem, it starts to make some sense to you. So, in an article that was written by Murphy, he says that the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock continues to challenge readers' expectations both of what constitutes poetry and what constitutes meaning. So it's saying that, he goes on in his thing and he talks about this we that it mentions in the beginning. It says, let us go and make our visit. That's a we. But the question is, who is we and who is he talking to? We don't know. But as the poem goes on, you start to realize he's talking more of himself and relating to his readers as he's going through this poem. So this we start to kind of understand what it means as we keep reading on. So that's the disillusionment right there. The disillusionment is the fact that a lot of the things that he says are hard to understand, and the meanings are not extremely clear, but that disillusionment is what makes this poem a modernistic poem. The imagery. And another thing that he uses is a lot of imagery, which is an extremely modernistic trait to have in poetry. He begins in his first couple stanzas. He says, "The yellow fog that rubs its back upon the window panes, the yellow smoke that rubs its muzzle on the window panes, licked its tongue into the corners of the evening, lingered upon the pools that stand in drains, let fall upon its back the soot and falls from chimneys." So he's describing a fog here that's settling over the town. And if you listen to what he's saying, he's describing it in great detail, almost like a cat. So this imagery that he gives, I mean, you can see this fog, you can see it in the town, and you can see how he's describing how it's moving. That strong imagery is a major trait that is used in modernistic poetry. And he has another stanza that talks about this fog. And again, the imagery is very obvious in his poetry. And later on he talks about the evening. He says, "In the afternoon the evening sleeps so peacefully, smoothed by long fingers, asleep, tired, or it malingers." So again, he's talking about the imagery. He's giving us this image of these fingers, and like the evening is fingers across the sky, and that again is very modernistic for this poem. And again, another thing that he uses that makes this poem extremely modernistic is he actually begins his poetry with a foreign language. If you can see it, it's backwards for you guys, but here I circled it here. In the very beginning of his poem, he uses a foreign language. It's actually Italian, and it is a quote from Dante's Inferno. And this little portion is, I've read about what it meant, again, in Murphy's report, and it says that it's talking about this writing from Dante's Inferno. It says, "Although the desentimentalized approach may often strike the unprepared reader as sounding instead cold or dispassionate, it is nevertheless in keeping with the modernism." So having that foreign language in the beginning is very disillusioning. It scares readers at first because they don't know what it says, and that is, again, very modernistic, and it gives this mood to the poem of mystery that Eliot was wanting when he wrote it.